Good morning, everybody. We were trying to regroup here. For today's agenda, we were deluged by suggested language changes, and they all came in at the last minute. So I have at least 9 that I found that came in, and what we were going to do is try to work through them today and see if we can, if there's an idea that may only have one advocate and no one else cares about it, we will probably drop it. If it's an idea that has some legs that several people would like to discuss, then we will probably discuss it and vote on it. So we have one pretty complete piece by Rivers Alliance. If
Where'd she go?
uh-oh.
Oh.
Sorry. So if you're ready, Alicia, to start discussing, yes, excuse me, my co-chair, let him make opening remarks. But what we would like to do is to try to hone in on the language that probably has some support in here. And then because there's a lot of it, we will probably end up voting in one more meeting, which would probably be in January. So people can think about it over the Christmas break. And when we come back, we'll be ready to take final action on it. I've been working on the report like night and day, and I'm up to, I'm almost finished with the November 21st meeting. And then I was not able to finish it for today, but I have one more meeting to condense, and then you'll be able to vote on that as well. And then we'll have the recommendations in there. So if Alicia, in a moment, Alicia, we'll have you start with the first, with your proposed language. And then we've got 8 other ones to go through. So hopefully we're going to be there in January. Representative Anderson.
Good morning. So we all agree on balancing the protection of riparian buffers with protecting property rights. As the saying goes, the devil's in the details. We'll have a disagreement on some of the details. It's hard enough to get 2 people to agree, let alone 24. What matters, we navigate the differences carefully. We can reach a balanced and lasting outcome. I do really appreciate, especially the 3 major inputs, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, Alicia.
So that people can
Oh.
I'm not as loud as I usually am. So I can share my screen if you don't mind. Let's see. Thank you for your patience. I got a new laptop, but I haven't completely set it up yet. It would be lightning faster if I did.
Yeah, just a question while we're waiting. You mentioned 9 proposals. I'm just a little bit baffled. I admit that I was running around to meetings yesterday afternoon and evening, and I know of 4, and I've downloaded 4. I've looked at them, and I'm just wondering, is there the other 5? I'm coming up empty on those. So if anybody can shed some light, that'd be helpful.
Let me get it for you. In no particular order, there was Rep. Dubisky and Janet Brooks, attorneys, moved the burden of proof onto the applicant suggestion. And then there was defining riparian buffers and the ability to regulate vegetation removal, which is the one we're going to hear in a minute. There was a consensus idea to assign regulatory powers to the municipal commissions, inland wetland and watercourses commissions. The fourth one was for planning and zoning's water pollution responsibilities. There was a suggestion to add Long Island Sound language to coastal town planning and zoning from Denise Savageau. The fifth one was an incentive program for farmers to add a riparian buffer, and that was from Mr. Pickering. There was a pretty lengthy one from Mr. DeFelice, which I haven't even read yet. And then the seventh one was was a consensus. It sounded like a consensus idea, proposing that we give deep additional resources for riparian buffer categories and for responding to towns. And the eighth one was allowing DEEP to farm out their instruction. And that came from Khaki Wick and Denise Savageau. And then the ninth one was to clarify the marine trades exemption, discussed by Marine Trades and also Alicia Sharamut. So those were my 9. When I've been writing the report, I've been pulling them out as I find them. So, Alicia.
Liz has her hand up.
Liz.
Hi, no, I had the same question. I have 4 reports. Casey sent them at midnight last night.
Yep.
So I've been able to review all 4. However, if you could send over the other ones also, that would be really helpful for January's meeting. And lastly, when people speak, can they identify themselves? I know many of you know each other, but for someone like me I think this is the first time I've participated in a working group for the Environment Committee. I don't know a lot of the participants, and that would be really helpful.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Liz. Representative D'Amico.
I don't want to belabor things, but maybe to clarify. So at the end or during last week's meeting, several people had made suggestions. So I think if people look in their emails from last Wednesday, they'll probably find the remaining proposals besides the 4 that Casey sent out last night. I think those other ones are in people's inbox from last Wednesday. That's my recollection. I could be wrong.
Okay, and I have my original list here. I can send it to Casey right now. He can send it to everybody else. So I'll do that while Alicia is talking.
Hi, everyone. Alicia Sharmat. I'm the Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. And I apologize. I'm probably the worst person of not introducing myself. So anyway, so delving right in, some of this was me just plugging in some of the things that Janet had proposed in the past. And some of this is work that was done last session as the riparian bills were going around, that has been tweaked by a lot of folks and reviewed by our watershed groups that have, which are a major stakeholder in clean water in our communities. So the part in the legislative finding, again, this is Janet's, what Janet had proposed at some point, but she also has a proposal in there, and I would defer to her proposals. Things have been flying around, as you all know. So she might have tweaked language after I had put this here. So that was essentially Janet's language. This adds a definition of natural vegetative cover to the list of definitions at the ends, which natural vegetated cover means native and adapted shrubs. Adapted is important because some native shrubs can't even survive as our growing zones are shifting. And the point is to exclude invasives and manicured grass from that definition. And I guess my reference might have been wrong, and Janet did propose a different statutory reference. So I'll have to go back and double check that, even though I think I did double check it. But excuse me, I don't mean to make everybody dizzy. So under permitted operations and uses, I think it's really important to sort of talk about, because this is one of the most confusing sections in the Inland Wetlands Act. The as of right section, it exempts certain uses from having to submit an application to a local inland wetlands association. With the caveat that there are certain activities that are not part of this exemption. So the first part of this change is a fix to make things a little bit clearer. And granted, this doesn't have anything to do with riparian buffers, but the double negative where the removal is down where road construction or the erection of buildings not directly related to the farming operation moves it up to be more clear about that is an as of right activity. Where it is currently, it is not clear enough. It has been a problem from what I understand from a lot of land use attorneys. This does add, it exempts the removal of natural vegetated cover within 10 feet of a water source for agricultural activities. And then further down on that same note is that it removes the removal of natural vegetated cover within 10 feet of a water course for residential. This was meant to satisfy Representative Mashinsky's request to try to make sure that, you know, we're protecting our vegetated areas where there have been as of right exemptions in the past. The section under, let's see, well, we'll just follow along. So these are uses that are permitted. And what read formerly as only conservation of soil vegetation adds including the revegetation of riparian areas with natural vegetative cover and removal of invasive species identified, blah, 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 blah. This makes sure that if you want to do the right thing, remove invasives or revegetate, you can do it. And it's more explicit. And then down under factors for consideration of the commissioner. Now, Janet had originally put this language in the regulated area section, or the I can't remember exactly what it's called. I moved it up here because we were moving toward not having specific widths called out in the statute. It was my understanding that we were going to allow DEP to provide a guidance or technical assistance. So I moved it here because I felt it was more appropriate without having those widths in there, as it doesn't seem like we're proposing a new regulated area. And essentially this is just Janet's, sorry about that. Janet's language that I tweaked a little bit. And honestly, I think her language is better that in her proposal. So it's something that we can take a look at. Where the heck was I? Sorry, guys. I think she has some good proposed language for this. Also added to, because again, we are talking about not calling out specific widths, but I felt very strongly that we do need to highlight that there needs to be heightened protection for public drinking water supply areas and cold water habitat. Both of these are mapped by the agencies. The public drinking water watershed map is available on the DPH website, and the cold water stream habitat map. And I believe Bill Hyatt had sent a link to that at the last meeting. These exist on the department websites. So essentially, this really, in the places where we absolutely positively need more protection, this makes this explicit. And a lot of other states have this in the protection for the vegetated cover for specifically for areas for cold water habitat and drinking water watersheds. Let's see. So I'm going to let Janet talk about her, when she's able to join us, talk about her recommendation for how to do the reversal of the burden of proof. But I think, let me just make sure, I don't think there was anything more here. Yes, so this, I think, gets us toward being able to protect the existing vegetated areas, sort of is permissive of trying to do the right thing as far as revegetation and removal of invasives without creating a new regulated layer over it. This can be applied to the upland review area. I think it gets us, I know it's not perfect, but I think it gets us where we hope to be going in protecting vegetation. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, sorry. You guys.
Frank,
Sorry, thank you. I'm going to ask Casey to put an image up on the screen, if he would be so kind, and then I'm going to ask you some questions related to the cold water habitat. Okay, so the map you're looking at is part of my hometown of Durham. And there's some questions that I have related to this particular image. So the first is that to the, I guess to the left, kind of center, is the Coggins River. To the right is the Cream Pot Brook. Now the Cream Pot Brook at the more towards the top of this image is not in a blue shaded area. The blue shaded area does have one highlighted identifier, which says stream, Cream Pot Brook, temperature logger count 0, fish sample count 2. And my question relates to the fact that the Cream Pot Brook has an area that is and is not in the blue area. The second question is related to the other streams that are not part of the Cream Pot Brook within the blue area. So for your cold water habitat protection, is the area that is not in the blue area but is still the Cream Pot Brook subject to the cold water regulations you're proposing?
If they're not in the blue area, they're not subject. The whole reason for the reference was to have the mapped areas.
Okay. The second question is, what about the other streams that are in the blue area, are all of those little tributaries and streams and brooks, are they all subject to the cold water?
If they're in the blue area, yes.
Thank you.
Denise Savage.
Yeah, I just want to point out that in the context of putting this cold water in, it's something that something allows the wetland agency to consider that they should consider cold water habitat. It's not a regulated area per se. It's looking at, we have maps that show us where you have cold water habitat. If you know more or less but if you know more about the cold water habitat in your a wetland agency can do more work on that. But we do have maps that show that. So I just want to make sure that this, it's not necessarily a regulated area. It's basically saying, hey, when we're making determinations and considerations for the wetland agency, they should consider both source water protection, which is, the drinking water supplies, as well as consider cold water streams. And you have to consider the impacts on that. So these are just items that they can use for consideration. I just want to make sure we have clarify how this is being utilized.
Okay, so it's a tool, it's a guidance tool for local commissioners.
That's
correct?
right.
Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, I guess to summarize, that means that any of the people that are within those areas would have to, the inland wetlands agencies would have to assess whatever their project was, even if their stream is not the Cream Pot Brook in this case. And some of those little streams are really very small, they're probably seasonal in some respects. So thank you.
Yeah, I think Denise's point is that we have this data, we ought to use it, so. In
Well,
many
I-
cases, we have data that should be used as a guide when they make decisions.
I think I'd also like to stress that, again, this isn't a prohibition. It's not a no-go zone. The way this works is that, while there is no legend there that shows how far, I would argue that most of those lands are already subject to review by the Inland Wetlands Agency if they have an upland review area that's got a width greater than 50 feet. And it just points out that these areas are more sensitive, and they are validly, as Bill Hyatt had talked about yesterday, of the need to protect these areas. I think he was very eloquent. Gives the commissions the explicit direction they need to be more protective of those areas.
Co-chair Anderson. Rep. Dubitsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have, since we got these very late last night, I admit that I have not had a chance to thoroughly review them all, but the one in front of us right now, I do have a number of comments. Starting off with section 22A-36, the proposed new language. I would put a period after the words near shore waters. What follows after that is the scientific evidence has confirmed blah, blah, blah. That may or may not be the case, but we did not go through that scientific evidence specifically that is identified here in this working group, and I would not want to establish that in state statute without doing so. So I understand having a provision that gives legislative intent, but I think that would be satisfied by putting a period after near shore waters and striking the rest. Going to section 22A40. We had, I believed, this group had decided that there will not be any essentially no-go zone. There will not be any specific area that was prohibited from removing vegetation. And I see in two separate sections, section 22A40 A1, there is a section that the exemption shall not be construed to include removal of natural vegetative cover within 10 feet of any watercourse. That sounds like a no-go zone to me.
It's not a no-go zone.
I'm sorry?
It's not a no-go zone. It makes the activity subject to regulation by the committee. It's not saying you can't do that. It's saying that if that activity is going to happen within 10 feet in a residential area or agricultural, it has to come to the commission. It's not a no-go zone. It just makes it a regulated activity.
Well, I disagree with that, that's how it would be interpreted. And there's another section under incidental, uses incidental to the enjoyment and maintenance of residential property. The same language, shall not include removal of natural vegetative cover within 10 feet of any watercourse. I think that would also be considered a no-go zone. You know, having been in front of wetland and watercourse commissions across the state and been in court on a number of proposals, I can tell you that's how this would be interpreted from my experience.
Oh,
Okay, well, we can discuss that one, or I can move on to my other.
well, I was thinking that you're probably aiming at Vermont type language where you're saying the natural condition is this. And there would be a permit required if you were going to remove the natural condition. Is that what where you're aiming at?
Mhm.
Okay. So we could tinker with the Vermont language, Rep. Dubitsky, and maybe clear that up.
That would be great. You know, I certainly understand the intent. If that's the intent, that activity within that area becomes subject to a review. But the way it's written, it would be more than that, I think.
Yeah, I don't, when I went through the New England states last night rapidly, I didn't see any total prohibition on vegetation. There was, the strongest one was Vermont, which was, they were talking about the natural condition and preserving the natural condition as much as possible, but it still allowed for a permit to destroy it. If, for example, someone was building something, a dock or something, they would come in for a permit to remove the vegetation.
Do you want to, Francis?
Just quickly.
Well, if I could,
Wait.
if I could just go finish.
Yeah, sure.
These, I'd appreciate it. Section 22A41, that addition, you know, perhaps it's just a statutory linguistic issue, but I would strike the words because of the known ecological benefits as stated in section 22A36 as revised to the riparian area from natural vegetative cover. That is not necessary. You don't typically put in a because clause in the middle of a sentence. That is this is an authorizing sentence that authorizes the agency to do something. You typically don't stick a because clause in the middle of such a sentence, but that I imagine LCO would deal with that linguistic thing.
I can tell you why I think you put that there. Rep. Dubitsky, I've had conversations with our attorney on the Environment Committee, and he doesn't like adding language to the findings. He prefers it in the actual enforcement language. So I think that's why you put it there.
Well, I think honestly, with this, I would wait until until Janet has a chance to talk about her proposal, because some of it I had sort of taken what Janet had and sort of put it in there as sort of a placeholder. But I think she has proposed language that's probably better and more worked out legally, so to speak.
And there's also a section that we haven't really talked much about, and there is no proposed change in this proposal, but I think we should at least consider it, and I think we will have to address it, which is section 22A 45. Currently, if you propose to take some do some activity on your property and the Wetland Commission prevents you from doing so, you go to the assessor and you say, the value of my property has been diminished because I can not do what I want to do on my property. I can't build the house, I can't build a garage, whatever it is, because the Wetland Commission wouldn't let me. Well, if we're going to add now riparian areas, people are going to have the same situation, and they're going to have to be able to go to their assessor and say, my property value has just been diminished. Don't tax me as much. That's what that section is for. And if we're going to add riparian areas, we're going to have to allow people to get their taxes reduced because their property values are going to be reduced. I think that was it on this proposal.
Okay, we have online Liz Verna.
Unmute. Hi, Liz Verna from Connecticut Home Builders Association. This is just a housekeeping thing, and I think it was provided for in the version that was sent to us from Mr. DeFelice and Attorney Brooks. But under definitions, I think we need to identify what riparian areas are. And unless I'm missing something, I don't see a definition of riparian areas in this version submitted by Alicia. Am I missing it?
Did include that. And what I would say is there are some things that came in from Attorney Brooks after I had submitted my proposals. So there's definitely a marrying there that can happen to make sure that it all jives. But yeah, having the definitions there when you've introduced something new is very important. Oh, she's
Okay.
here.
So
Brooks is
so
here.
my comment is that we should add a definition in this version if this is the version that we're going to be using. And then all of my other questions, cold water, etc., have been answered. So thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And you're right, we do need a definition. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Also online, Joe Nichols, our forester.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Joe Nichols, I'm a certified forester. My comment, I have two comments. One is related to the proposed language and changes to 22A 40, inserting the 10-foot area there. In the previous meeting, I made a statement that I don't want to create any ambiguity in the laws, and I'm thinking again from a very practical perspective. I could permit it as of right, construct a farm road, for my farm or my forestry operation, but you can't construct the farm road without disturbing the native vegetation within 10 feet of a riparian area. You can't do it. So I would propose eliminating that 10-foot because I think it's going to cause, then you get into, is the removing of that vegetation within a 10-foot area, is that going to be permitted or regulated but then another part of your activity, which is the road construction or the installation of a temporary crossing for a forestry operation, that can cause confusion. And we also have to remember this is all being interpreted and enforced by local wetlands commissions. So I would have a problem with that 10-foot change to that section. And then, not to get off topic and talk about assessments, but I want everybody to remember that in 2005, Public Act 05190 was passed, which is Connecticut General Statute 12-63G, which is assessment of buffers to inland wetlands and watercourses. So before we open up 490 or talk about reducing assessments along wetlands, watercourses, and riparian areas, which I think is a valuable tool, we should look at 12-63G, which is already in the general statutes, and see if that just needs to be tweaked a little bit. Thank you.
You said 12-63G?
Yes, 12-63G. It was Public Act 05190, passed in July of 2005.
Okay, I want to ask you a question, Joan. When is DOT still here? They're not here today, but when they do their projects, they sometimes remove vegetation. And then when the project is finished, they grade the area and replant the vegetation. So would that work in this situation if you had a 10-foot strip of vegetation near the river or stream, and somebody had to build something there? Could you then replant? Could the commission then require replanting of the area after the work is done?
I mean, they could, but now you're regulating an agricultural, a forestry operation when the jurisdictional ruling would normally come in as permitted as of right without a permit. And that's what I mean. Are you going to start permitting agricultural and forestry operations even though they're permitted as of right? It's kind of splitting hairs here, but I'm thinking of myself as putting in some temporary bridge mats or something to cross a stream or a water course. A lot of times that come in permitted as of right. And then Mother Nature sort of just reclaims those areas. You pull the mats out or the bridge, and Mother Nature just fills that in. So if we're going to start being asked to replant those areas, then we're looking at some sort of a permit.
Yeah, well, you're right. In our part of the world, the trees will come in automatically.
Yeah, we have no problem growing trees.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Mary Pelletier.
Well, I was actually thinking that 10 feet is not enough. And, what I see in the city is that quote unquote Mother Nature is invasive species. And I also see that often mats aren't removed, that the soil, the erosion fencing isn't removed. And it's a real problem because every small area of nature does matter in the city. And so yeah, I was going to chime in and just say 10 feet isn't enough. But maybe going back to the whole question of really understanding the relationship of the built environment to waterways, to water courses, maybe there is a series of recommendations of recommended widths or that describe various ecosystem functions, so that whoever is making the decision would have that as a reference. I'm not sure that's possible, but I think a lot of these decision makers really don't have the background in understanding the value of nature, not only to the health of the community around it, but there is actually considerable economic value to having beautiful nature in cities and other places. So just to circle back around to my question, what would it be possible to provide a diagram of recommended how do I say this, of functionalities so that decision makers could understand what they're doing? And Janet's looking like she's got something to say, so I'm going to stop there. I don't know. You're not? No. Okay. All right. But yeah, is that possible to provide that reference with language and with the statute?
Well, we did talk about having deep, either with a consultant or I guess it would have to be a consultant with the thin nature of their wetlands office, but someone would prepare recommendations for at least 3 levels of protection. So it would be the watershed, the drinking water watersheds, the cold water fisheries, and the urban areas for starters. So you may not have been at that meeting, but we talked about if we could get funds to deep, they could prepare models for those different types of watersheds.
That's yeah, I have missed a number of meetings and I apologize for that. I focus on family. But again, just just to mention, everything I see is whenever there's a road, the disturbances, that's where the invasive species are coming in. And there should be more effort to stop the disturbances, but also to make sure that the invasive species are not what follows construction. And it's not rocket science. It's just allocating the budget so that the landscape, which is notoriously in design projects, the landscape is the last thing to ever get done. And so it's often that's because they've run out of budget and they've spent it on other things. They never have enough money to make the landscape be successful. So we need to try harder to make sure that it is.
Thank you. Francis Pickering.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. Alicia, I appreciate you drawing attention to ensuring there are protected riparian buffers along or in the catchment areas for public drinking water supplies. We released at WestCog a comprehensive report, about 100 pages this last year, called Safeguarding Public Water Supply Watersheds, Local Strategies to Prevent Chemical, Petroleum, and Stormwater Contamination of Connecticut's Drinking Water Resources. And protected riparian buffers are one of our top recommendations about how to do this. 80% of the land that contributes to our drinking water supplies, our surface drinking water supplies, is privately owned. It's not water company land. It's not subject to DPH regulation. So really, the first and last line of defense for the water that flows off that land into our drinking water supplies is local regulation, like what we're talking about today. And that's why it's so critical. A couple of other things. Well, one other thing, actually. In response to Joan's comment about Section 1263G of the Connecticut General Statutes, assessment of buffers to inland wetlands or watercourses. I don't want to jump ahead to our proposal, but that provides for assessment adjustments to reflect property that's required as a buffer. And what we're talking about with the Public Act 490 proposal is not requiring anything of farmers, but providing an incentive program for them in a non-regulatory way to not work the land that fronts rivers and streams at their own option. So 1263G wouldn't actually apply there. I'm happy to talk about that when we get to our proposal later on.
And I thank you for mentioning the reports that WestCog has, and also would like to note that I think there'll definitely be a resource for DEP if DEP agrees to update model regulations or provide some technical assistance. They've a lot of good work has already been done there that can be referenced.
That COG seems to be way ahead of the others in terms of protections. I guess you've been working on it longer.
We've been working on it longer. We have fantastic staff, and we're also a highly developed part of the state that faces drinking water supply challenges. So every job counts.
Okay, do we have further questions on this version that we're looking at now? Think we're talked out? Oh, Frank.
Thank you. Alicia, this may be a different version. I'm not quite sure, but I thought the latest version had something in 22A-36 called one size fits all and variable distances. Have those been eliminated? Just checking.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, that was in the previous version. And at the last meeting, we seem to be moving towards having DEP provide technical assistance and guidance for the local commissions to, make their own decisions because they know their waters better. That's why that was removed. So that, and those were suggested minimums for various resources.
So is it your expectation that DEP will put those numbers down and they'll come back in part of the proposed legislation?
And ask him. Brian,
Sorry.
Are your proposed, we had talked about deep preparing models that would have different standards for different types of watersheds, different width recommendations and so forth. Is that in your are you working on that right now?
We are not working on that. Yeah, it did come up last meeting. I don't recall if it came up before. No, that's not something currently
You can't do it without
Work.
money, right?
correct. Yeah, that would.
Okay,
it
so
would
if we could get money for you, you might be able to create this model.
Yes.
Denise?
Yeah, just quickly, the Long Island Sound Clean Waters and Healthy Watersheds work group that DEP chairs, and I'm co-chair of a subgroup looking at nature-based solutions, and we're looking at the guidelines that I provided to everybody in a link last time that's being used at the Chesapeake. So we're using that as a model to see, because there's a new requirement for Long Island Sound watershed in the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan that says that we will protect riparian buffers, and there's a very aggressive amount of riparian buffers that need to be protected within the whole watershed. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at the Chesapeake guidelines and seeing how we would incorporate. So I would think that we could piggyback that work, because this is looking at riparian areas, not just on the immediate Long Island Sound, but in the entire watershed, and see how that works in terms of the types of things we want to accomplish here. So just wanted to let you know that that's happening in the work group.
So the reason I'm asking is because, as you heard Representative Dubinsky say, we spoke quite a bit about no-go zones, and one size fits all sounds like a no-go zone. So
There is not a one size fits all proposal here.
okay, thank you.
Unless I'm missing something, there were no widths suggested. It was the understanding that. So what I will say is, from what we have heard from the commissions, is that they would appreciate technical assistance. But I also believe there are inland wetlands commissions that, already kind of know their waters and know their stuff and would be ready to go from the get-go. But there are commissions that would definitely appreciate technical assistance in understanding, what's protective when you have different slopes, when you have various types of water bodies. I mean, there's a lot of things that we should be taking more into consideration to protect our waters, including if they're on an impaired list. And the commissions know their waters best. So
We have Peter Basserman and then, then Eliza.
This is just a question of clarity. On any of the proposals that you've received, have we changed the definition at all of water courses?
Well, some of them have added, I can't even remember what I was looking at, but some of them have added more clearly riparian buffers in lists of definitions.
But at this point, we are still including ponds and lakes in any of our discussions regarding riparian buffers. Is that correct?
I think they're already, if I understand correctly from Deep, they're already included
Right,
as a water course. Is that correct?
right.
Yes. My understanding, and I haven't been in all the meetings, is that you are interested in looking at rivers and streams particularly. And one of my recommendations that I haven't seen in another one is that you add a definition of river and a definition of stream, because right now it is capturing all lakes, all ponds, in addition to rivers and streams.
I don't think we had consensus on just rivers and streams.
Mhm.
I believe, at least at one meeting, I was very vocal that we would be depriving our lakes and ponds who are struggling with blue-green algae issues, with an increase in invasives, that we are robbing them of the tool, a primary tool that they're going to need if we are going to exclude lakes and ponds.
So that one was probably going to come to a vote at some point because there's a definite difference of opinion in here on if we meet in.
Well, what
July.
I'm saying, it wasn't consensus.
Frank.
Thank you. I disagree. According to my notes, first meeting, we agreed on riparian meaning rivers and streams.
We agreed that we would not include wetlands.
Yeah, that's what correct. Yes. We agreed we would not, because Rip Dubitsky was concerned about isolated wetlands and he wanted to be sure that was not under consideration, which we all agreed to. Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with Alicia that we may not have an agreement on this, but as I noted before, I believe all ponds and lakes in Connecticut are not terminal. They actually flow into other bodies of water. So anything that is transported into those ponds and lakes, if it does not settle there, will be transported downstream into other bodies, including rivers and streams.
Yeah, it's a continuous system, so.
For very good reason, water courses was defined as it is now in our statute, because we can't tease out. I mean, water is one water.
Yeah, it's not
It's
like the Great
flowing
Basin.
in and out of various places.
Yep.
And if we exclude some, we're losing ground. Any ground we're going to gain on doing it on rivers and streams. Scientifically, it just doesn't make sense to exclude lakes and ponds.
And this may end up as a vote at some point. Eliza.
Yes, I just had some, you asked if there were any further comments on this proposal. And I understand that you adopted language from Attorney Brooks, and so this may not be appropriate for this moment. And I also looked at Attorney Brooks's most recent submission, and this language isn't in there, but I just wanted to say that I really don't think that you should use "in the absence of actual adverse impact." I think that legally is bad. I think that you want to keep the nexus between the activity, the removal of vegetation, and the quality of the water in the river or stream or water course.
What does that mean, Mr. Clerk?
That was the AI summary that's been employed before, and I think it had like an hour time limit. So
Okay,
that was just that expiring.
an hour of AI summary.
Can we restart it?
Good question. Let
We
me
don't know who.
let me look into that. Yeah.
It's a big mystery. It's built into the system, apparently. But you get an hour of AI and then it stops. And then the rest of it, you have to take your own notes. Or watch the tape again. Okay, we have Doug and then Francis.
Thank you. I too thought we had limited it to the rivers and streams more than once in this group, but I've been in the legislature now for quite a few years, and my experience is that all too often the legislature attempts to tackle a problem with a overall solution without a firm understanding of how that proposed solution is going to affect the people of the state. And it takes too big a bite, too fast, and it results in unintended consequences. And I have seen over the years I've been here that the most effective legislation is legislation that goes in incrementally, tries a solution, sees if it works on a smaller scale, and either expands it or changes it. And if we are going to take a very big bite, I am quite confident we will be back here trying to fix things in the face of big problems that we had not anticipated, including significant litigation that is not going to be helpful to anybody. So I would suggest we do as I thought we had agreed and limit our new proposal to rivers and streams. And if it turns out over time that it's being effective, perhaps then we can assess whether or not it would be prudent to expand it to other types of water features.
Rep. Dubitsky, with all due respect, what you're asking is for the Inland Wetlands Commissions to, it's going to upend the way they've looked at everything based on these definitions over the last 50 years. I think it'll create more confusion by adding another definition outside of the wetlands and watercourses definitions. And I think it's going to make things more difficult for those on the ground making these land use decisions.
I'm fairly certain that most inland wetland and water commissions, even those staffed with only lay people, can tell the difference between a river and a pond.
Can I suggest that we look at a couple of the other New England states on the lakes issue rather than going back and forth here? Because somebody's already dealt with this. We just have to figure out who it is and how they dealt with it. Eliza.
Yes. So when I did my research for a couple of weeks ago, my understanding was that you were looking at rivers and streams. And so the laws that I examined looked at rivers and streams, and that is what most riparian buffers are. The laws have definitions of rivers, they have definitions of streams, and they explicitly state that the regulations are along rivers and streams. They may have different categories of rivers and streams. There are vegetation protections around other water bodies. But if you're looking at riparian buffers and you're looking at other New England states, it tends to be rivers and streams.
Right. And if I could just say one more thing, almost all rivers and streams are natural. Very few ponds and lakes in this state are natural. Most of them are man-made.
Right, and they are connected, unfortunately, to the rivers and streams. So, no, I think what we were trying to do is we were trying not to undo previous legislation, which did include lakes and ponds. So this is going to be tricky to write this. We'll have to get more advice on. I think we're going to have to consult with our attorney and in the committee and get more advice on this. Because we don't want to undo existing law, which if we clarify that it doesn't mean rivers and streams, we are undoing existing law. So trying not to get caught in that.
I'm not sure I agree with that. If we are adding a layer of regulation, we could add it to only certain types of water features, as opposed to adding it to all water features.
We could. Needs thought. We had Mary Pelletier and then Francis.
So I wanted to also add, I mean, I'm in Hartford. I see the unintended consequences of development, which is flooded neighborhoods, basement backups, deteriorating structures because they've been built too close to waterways. But I also see the economic benefits of higher real estate prices when you've actually conserved nature within high density urban areas. And so I often hear like how important it is, you know, to develop your stream so that you can build something, because it seems our whole economy and now our democracy is based on real estate values. But I highly recommend we really add a different, maybe a different request of deep or some, you know, as this goes forward, we need to recommend that there's some studies of the economic relationships and the impacts and the benefits of development to water, right? Because I think that's really missing in a lot of these conversations. It's there's one side of the one side is, oh, we must build things in order to let our economy go forward, and the other side is you know, and it's not that extreme. It's a very nuanced situation. So in the same way that we may need deep to build some kind of model for the widths and the ecosystem functionalities, we also may need to get some guidance for these commissions to understand what happens when they do allow you know, development in areas where the slope is too steep and buildings collapse. I mean, I've seen this where the waterway gets polluted and no one wants to live in it, where their basements back up after flooding and people move out. I mean, I could go on and on. So I don't, so that's one thing is, could we do that? Is there a way to get that done so that that level of guidance is available to the commission? That would be helpful. But the other, this is a minor thing, going to back to the language, is in the discussion of riparian buffers, the native vegetation, you don't mention ground covers. And I think native ground covers are often overlooked because we've eradicated so much ground cover due to grazing, agriculture, and mowed lawns. But there's a whole host of ground covers that are native, that could be used adjacent to streams. And so I would like, I think that mentioning ground cover, you know, ferns, let me see what I've got here, ferns, ground vines. I'm not a, you know, I'm not an ecologist. I just know that when I do a lot of work with nature in the city, what I'm seeing is that those ground covers can function beautifully and not intrude upon the views that homeowners and others feel are important. But we need to learn how to effectively recultivate native ground covers into the communities that we live in, because they've been eradicated.
Thanks, Mary. Francis Pickering.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I, along too, like Alicia, am concerned about carving out a separate set of water courses and bodies in the regulation that are treated differently, right? I think our assumption here is we're just going to add riparian areas and then not start to create an if-then situation that's branching. And I don't exactly know, this would add, I think, complexity if we started treating lakes and ponds differently. Because, for instance, how do you handle a river where a beaver creates a dam and then a pond forms? Does that suddenly now get pulled out of riparian areas? Or there's blockage that flows downstream and blocks it, right? What is a pond or a lake? I think we can all say that's a pond or a lake looking at it, but it's actually a continuum of definitions. Things that are lakes are often called ponds or vice versa. Some things aren't called ponds or lakes at all. They're pools. I think this would require substantial additional education for commissioners to understand exactly where the lines are between what is a water course or water body for which they should consider riparian areas and what is a water course or water body for which they are not to consider riparian areas. And what do you do when those areas invariably overlap? Because ponds and lakes are not in isolation. They connect to rivers and streams. So you could literally have a pond or a lake being fed by multiple streams that you buffer out, where you have a certain percentage of the frontage of the littoral area being the riparian buffer, but other parts are not in it. You get into quite a complex mapping exercise to say, this property here has a riparian buffer, but this one, the next house over doesn't, but the house beyond that does, because we have multiple streams feeding into this river or lake. So we're creating a ecological and geographic and definitional challenge by, I think, trying to split this hair.
One thing that some of the states did was put in a date that as of this date, if something was there, was a pre-existing condition, then you would not make them fix it. We could do it that way so that, for new lake developments, they would fall under riparian. For the old ones, maybe they wouldn't. But that's, if Rep. Dubitsky is worried about replanting an existing site, maybe that's the way to fix that. You could think about that before January, but we could just pick a date. Let's see, who else we have? Bill Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Lucy, I'm with Save the Sound. And I have 3 points. One, I'll stay on topic with what we're talking about right now. I think Francis basically said what I was thinking, because I've got a pond on my property that's run a river, and the dam's from 1700 or 1701. What would that fall under? I voluntarily buffered that because I view it as a river, and I think if we add that type of complexity, I think the nightmare scenario of lawsuits is going to be born from that complexity. So we have to be very careful how we're going to split that out if we are. The other thing, just a sort of a point of order. I'm not sure who Peter Basserman is, but it would be also nice to have the membership list updated as different people are coming and going, so we're all aware of who's talking and what potentially their angle on the situation is. And then a process question. There's been a mention of voting. So given the timeline that we have right now, are we voting at this meeting? Are we going to vote in January? How is that? Because I feel like sometimes we're going in circular discussions and we're talking off topic sometimes. And I'm just trying to figure out how we can start settling some of the stuff we could settle and then narrowing down on the more controversial subjects. Thank you.
Well, since most of the language came in last night, it is very, very tough to vote today, to be honest, because you would have had to stay up all night reading everything. So that's why it's probably going to get done in January. But I'm hoping that some of the stuff can be rejected today if it doesn't have any legs. And Mr. Basserman, Peter Basserman, represents inland wetland and watercourse commissioners in towns over 15,000 population.
We sent an updated membership level.
But you got so many emails last night that
I think that was sent a week ago, right after the last meeting.
I know some of the commissioners can't actually show up here in person because they have to be in their office. So they come in by Zoom. We had Joanne Shapiro online.
Hi, thank you. To slightly piggyback on Francis's comment, but to expand upon it a little bit, in addition to sort of the natural situations where you've got a beaver dam creating a lake, so many of our ponds and lakes are in stream and have been created by damming sections of our rivers and streams. And most of the rivers and most of the lakes and ponds I can think of fall into that category, where it would make it very complicated. We're trying to avoid ambiguity in these regulations. So I'm not sure how you would exclude ponds and streams when they are just so integrated into these, how you would exclude ponds and lakes when they're so integrated into the river systems and the water is flowing from one to the other seamlessly. Often, there might be projects where dams are removed. There's just all kinds of ambiguity in there if you were to try to parse those out and separate them. Also, I'm not really sure what the hesitancy is to include ponds and lakes when we're not even at this point, none of the language in this proposal is even setting forth linear setbacks. It's just saying the commissions can consider riparian areas. And also the concern about existing conditions and having to replant. None of the proposed language would impose that at all, because the way the whole wetland statute is set up is that the commissions regulate activities, not land. So it's not retroactive. We don't go back and say, oh, all these lakes that have lawns up to the water's edge now need to plant. That's not how these regulations work. We receive a proposal and from an applicant and consider that and regulate based on that. It's not going to be retroactive. I don't think I've seen any proposal that would be retroactive.
I don't either. I think this is fixable, but we'll keep working on it. We have
Can we move on to the next one? If he's okay with it? Or is he drop it? He dropped it.
okay. So thank you, Alicia. Oh, you guys, you want to speak on this proposal? Okay. Can we have William first and then Denise? Go ahead.
I was going to ask who the voting members are. So thank you, Bill, for asking that. It does seem like we're kind of going around in circles on this topic. Is it possible at this point to take a vote on whether we are going to include lakes and ponds in this? And then, so that way when we come to the next meeting, that's already been decided and for future language?
I think it's unfair to stick that on people with the language coming in at the last second. So I'd prefer to mull this over until the January meeting.
Yeah.
Denise?
Hi, yeah, Denise Savageau. I'm with the Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts and also the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation. When we're looking at this, and I think Joanna, went over that, we're looking at activities. And there's a couple of things. There's two approaches, and we see this in the two pieces of legislation things that people have sent to us in terms of two different approaches. One is change the activity and talk about making sure that removal of vegetation is included in a regulated activity, or you could create a new regulated area, which is what Mr. DeFelicis looks at. I support, and I think the approach that this legislation that Rivers Alliance put before us, this proposed legislation, it really looks at the activity. And that's where you're not defining how big of the buffer is. You may be providing guidelines in terms of, hey, make it a little bit bigger in a public drinking water supply watershed than someplace else. But we're basically leaving that discretion so that it's not just about the agency, doing their work, but it's like they know what exactly the activity is and if they should allow it or not. So I think this discussion that we're having about worrying about that it's, just on lakes or, excuse me, just on streams or whatever. I think the idea was that if we're going to try to like say, oh, we're regulating 10 feet out or regulating 50 feet out, that we were looking at more that taking issue. But here we're really talking about an activity and a regulated activity, just like we would say by putting in impervious cover and whatever. And the statute is a little bit more ambiguity, has a little bit more ambiguity in it when it comes to, cutting vegetation. And I think that's where strengthening that, and that's where the definition of natural, taking out vegetation and looking at that as the regulated activity is where we need to go. There's some things we could definitely tweak in what Rivers Alliance has put before us, but I would say that I'm supportive of looking at fixing this regulated activity piece rather than trying to define a new regulated area. And I think that's where the semantics of rivers and streams gets more complicated. And we could really just stay with the definition of water courses very simply if we just talk about like what they can do with a regulated activity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments. We'd like to go to Frank DeFelice's proposal. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
Just so I understand, because I have about 1 million phone calls and questions from the farmers when I got out of here. And I have a hard time understanding. I appreciate I don't want to use the one size fits all too much, but I appreciate people trying to simplify things. But are we talking about regulating, let's say, an unregulated small farm pond? Is that, I'm going to leave lakes out of that discussion for right now. Just, is that what we're talking about? Like regulating a small farm pond in the area around it?
Alicia?
I might be able to help. I think a lot
Thank
of
you.
small,
I have to look at it.
yeah, a lot of small farm ponds don't have any vegetation around them. If they had native vegetation, if it was a natural pond that had native vegetation around it, it would be regulated. If it was something that wasn't, but a lot of the small ponds that have been built by conservation districts, NRCS in the past, which they don't do so much with anymore, but they did, that don't have native vegetation, they wouldn't be regulated because it would be like because it's the activity that's being proposed to regulate is the removal of the vegetation. If there's no vegetation there, then the pond's not regulated.
So the difference of what we have today versus what's proposed, I guess, is what.
So I
That's-
think the way it reads right now in my proposal, within 10 feet of a pond would be regulated.
So we'd be a small farm
Yes.
pond would, okay.
That,
Just so I understand.
just the way it reads right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's just the removal of vegetation that would be regulated.
Okay. Any part of it I'm uncomfortable with, and you're aware of that before I say anything, but I just wanted to understand that. All right. Thank you.
Can I just make one recommendation? Only because Attorney Brooks's proposal is very brief and kind of is very similar to this, and there were a lot of questions about it. Just for flow reasons, it might make sense to.
Frank's okay with that, so we'll put Janet online.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia, for your work. Janet, are you still here? I know she had a meeting.
No, I'm here. I'm just trying to bring up on my desktop my version, that's all, but folks can start talking about it. Or are you asking me to present on it? I don't.
Yep, we are. If yours is a little different from Alicia's, so if you wanted to comment on it.
Okay, so what I also had the benefit of doing was I had actually finished my draft Monday, and I asked Judge Berger, who was the creator of the land use docket and presided over it for 15 years. He's now retired, and I asked him if he would take a look at my draft and provide me with feedback, and he gave me lots of time and feedback. So some of my changes reflect that and are in my. So to begin, legislative finding. And I had the benefit of Mary calling me late yesterday afternoon and saying that the Environment Committee gets instruction from its, what do you call them, staff attorneys, drafting attorneys, whatever, not to do that. And so I said I needed to talk to Judge Berger about that because I knew that both of us were going to have, well, I have problems with it, and he also has problems with it. And he has volunteered to come meet with the drafting attorneys because I want to speak to the 4 legislators who are on the task force. This would really weaken the legislature's ability to articulate its intent in passing any legislation. And so if we have a weakened legislature that doesn't choose, because of advice or for whatever other reason, doesn't choose to articulate its intent, then that has to be picked up somewhere. And that somewhere in this process is going to be the judiciary. Because their first task they have when they are interpreting a statute, this is all the time, this isn't unique to environment, is to search for legislative intent. And where is legislative intent? In these things called legislative findings. And Judge Berger didn't have to remind me, although he did, that in every single wetlands case before the Supreme Court starts by citing the finding. So I just really want to urge you 4 legislators to really rethink this. And Judge Berger said it's not even worth a phone. It's not little enough to be worth a phone call. He wants to come and meet with your drafting attorney because you are turning away an opportunity. I said to Mary, I called it speaking from the grave. I mean, my previous state senator was David Levine, who was on the Environment Committee in 1972, and he helped, with this legislative finding. And I think of him speaking from the grave about the Wetlands Act every time there's a Supreme Court case on this. So that's the really big thing. And my changes from the previous version, where I was taking New Hampshire's language from their statute, were Judge Berger's. He thought we needed to omit the very last clause. So I don't know if it's still in Alicia's that you can see. It was something about recreation, property values, things that were really not central to the preservation and protection of wetlands. And then he stressed, not because we're making riparian areas a protected area, but because we're noting the benefit to riparian areas. He had me put in you can see about 4 places, the benefits, including riparian areas. So that's comment number 1. Comment number 2, very simple, 1-word addition to the already existing statutory definition of material. Add the word vegetation, because we had a discussion either 1 or 2 meetings back where I quoted the Connecticut Supreme Court decision in the melon tree cutting from 2005, where the Supreme Court is almost, let's say, ironic or sarcastic, saying if the cutting of trees and vegetation isn't material being removed within the definition of a regulated area, we don't know what is. But if for some reason small towns don't provide enough attorneys or to the commissions, let's make it easy and put the word vegetation in. So that's comment number 2. And I adopted Alicia's from Rivers Alliance definition of natural vegetative cover, and I just changed the reference to the invasive plants to the list, rather than it was a section about prohibitions of certain uses. And so I just made it reflect that, and I reflect the language about lists is from the statute on invasive plants. Same concept. The next thing is to amend. So I may have misunderstood. I thought I understood that the direction the working group wanted to go in was deep promulgating a regulation with 3 different sets of standards, widths. And so all I think of is when somebody has a duty to do, it's a lot easier to do it if you know you have a deadline.
Well, we
I
have to
never,
have
mi-
money
I
too.
never miss court deadlines, so I just thought that's the honor before, insert a date, adopt regulations in accordance with. Okay,
Give them the money, they'll do it. That's basically it.
okay.
Okay.
And the next one, so the next one, number 4, is to address Representative Dubitsky's comment that the burden of proof should remain on the applicant. And I think there could be really bipartisan support for this. Judge Berger was ecstatic about this. And I really wanted to know if I landed this right. And this is you said this is where to put it. After you said you have an obligation, if after the regs are adopted, you have to, if you do a regular activity, you have to file for a permit. You file for a permit by doing it on a form, whatever, and then you instruct the applicant. The burden of proof is on the applicant to establish that a permit may issue and to establish that no actual adverse impacts will occur from the proposed activities. And that second portion, the no actual adverse impact, is important because the Supreme Court, for the first time ever in the Riverbank case, read into the Wetlands Act the need for a finding of actual adverse impact. It doesn't exist in the statute, but to the extent they're going to impose it, that imposition needs to be on the applicant. And that's what this does. Okay. So number 5, did I skip one? 4? No, that's 4. 5 is, rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumption doesn't work. So I went and did the research on where rebuttable presumptions occur. So they occur on pretty simple factual issues. Was the person driving the vehicle authorized by the owner to be to be using the vehicle? These are not complex issues of scientific knowledge, causation, and all other things. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I don't know if you're picking it up. Am I able to be heard?
Yeah, you're fine. The dog is not hurt.
Okay. So, so I don't see statutory examples of this kind of complexity to have a rebuttable presumption. And the other place where we have a rebuttable presumption by court case law is it's a rebuttable presumption that ex parte communications are prejudicial. That's a much I'm really my dog is really barking like crazy, and I'm not able to.
You can send in comments.
So okay.
That would be helpful, an
So
annotated
I
version.
I just couldn't agree to provide any language about a rebuttable presumption, because here it would only result in us being exactly where we are without any mention of a riparian area to be protected. So that is, everybody would have to get experts, everybody, no better position than we are today. So I saw no.
Trying to make it easier, not worse. So thank you, Janet. Appreciate it. And if you have anything,
Okay.
Annotated version is good. Your recommendations from Judge Berger are in conflict with the recommendations from our committee attorney. So we're gonna have to bring these two guys together and discuss this, between now and January. I have Brian had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you,
Just
Madam.
wanted to make a point about the exemptions. I only looked at exemptions that were about the dealing with vegetation. And Judge Berger's point was the whole exemption sections really needs to be reexamined as a whole. And while I agree with him, I'm on the half a loaf is better than none, and that's why I put in some exemptions. And I did include, somebody was noting before, I don't know if that was Joe Nichols or something, I was putting in that vegetation removal for the creation of a farm road was not, was also an exempt activity.
Thank you, Janet. Brian.
Thank you. So I just wanted to start by addressing the comment about developing regulations. And then I know Eliza has some thoughts as well. So I think every time I think we've sort of reached a consensus that what we need is guidance and updated model regulations, we seem to be coming back to regulations. And so I want to make clear that we can certainly do model regulation updates. We can provide technical guidance. Regulations, we do not believe is the way to go here from DEEP standpoint.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm understanding. You think you can do updates, but not a new regulation. Updates to the model, is that what you're saying?
Updates to the model regulations,
Okay.
technical guidance addressing the kinds of issues that have arisen, but not a statewide regulation, not promulgation of a statewide regulation
Okay.
establishing all those criteria and factors.
Thank you. Good to know.
And then if I could.
We're gonna, Eliza.
No, real fast. In terms of the burden of proof bit, I just wanted to clarify that the language in Riverbend is that it's likely actual adverse impact. And I think that if you decide to codify that, that you should include likely. But I am hesitant on having a sweeping burden in this riparian buffers group. So DEEP's recommendation is that the burden is on the applicant in terms of removal of vegetation. But the language as submitted here is not that. It is for all activities within the upland review area.
Okay, thank you. Frank, you're up.
Thank you. This question is for Attorney Brooks. By adding vegetation to the materials section, I can understand where you would be going for if it was for removal of vegetation. But by putting it in materials where we also speak about depositing materials in wetlands and water courses, that would prohibit someone from planting vegetation. Am I wrong?
No, it wouldn't prohibit it. It makes it a regulated activity, which it currently is. It
So if I
currently
wanted-
is. The Supreme Court, has had told us what we always knew, that vegetation was material that's part of a regulated activity.
So if I wanted to restore an area, I would need a permit?
If the activity is affecting a wetlands or water course, yes.
Even
Not all permits are because people are doing bad things.
Thank you.
Doug.
Thank you. There's a couple of things here. Most of them are sort of wordsmithing changes that I would propose that I could certainly work with Attorney Brooks on. But there's a couple of things. First off, in the 22A36 area, I had already mentioned my proposed change, put a period after the words near shore waters and cut the rest of that. I don't think that would in any way hurt the impact of the legislative finding, but it would more accurately comport with what we actually did in this working group. But the one thing that I think is important, and I think it goes a little bit towards what DEEP has indicated with regard to, come on, computer. With regard to the burden of proof, where is it? Hold on, I am looking for that language. Oh, there it is. First off, I'm not sure that we have agreement or that we could even agree at this point without significant scientific discussion that we establish a standard of no actual adverse impacts. That is essentially a technical standard that I would be very hesitant in this group to adopt. It would be more, it would be more to my liking to be something like no net adverse impact. Because if there was, I think we discussed this at the last meeting, if I were to put in a boat dock, well, that would have arguably some adverse impact on a watercourse. But if I were to eliminate a large section of parking lot and impervious surface, well, the net impact could be positive. But under this standard, the no actual adverse impacts, I couldn't put the boat dock in no matter what I did, because it would have some actual adverse impact. So I think we need to be very careful about the words we choose if we're going to establish a new standard. And we really need to run that language past scientists and attorneys that can figure out what that will mean going forward and how that will affect other projects that may be beneficial to the waters.
Would you care to have me respond, or would you rather I hold my comment till you're finished?
Up to the chair.
We have to keep moving, so if you could give a succinct answer, that'd be great.
Yeah, there's some wordsmithing things here that I would propose, and my guess is that they don't substantially change Attorney Brooks's proposal, so I would just make those later.
I would be happy to work with Representative Dubitsky, and if you're interested or willing to have Judge Berger come along. The goal was to reverse the ruling in Riverbend. I'm not wed to the words at all, and I'm intrigued by your concept of net adverse impact. So
Right. I still think it's a, if we're going to establish a standard, any standard, whether it be no adverse impact, no net impact, I really think we need some scientific expertise to look at it and tell us if that is the correct standard. And I would certainly, rely on Deep for an opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Now we're going to hear from Frank DeFelice on his proposed changes to the whole wetlands and watercourses statute. Although he didn't change a lot in there, it just looks like it, I think. Go ahead, Frank.
Thank you all. Good morning. My name is Frank DeFelice. I serve as the chair of the Regional Planning Committee for the Lower Connecticut River Valley Council of Governments, also as the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the town of Durham, also as the chair of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency for the town of Durham. I'll briefly go through what I proposed, and I've realized that there's a large number of pages because it basically took 440, gave you the whole thing. And there was kind of a reason behind that. I was concentrating revisions on the inland wetlands sections. However, I'm aware, as Denise pointed out, that title may become an issue, and we may want to put some language in there, maybe not, but I just wanted to put the whole thing out there for everyone. So let me just kind of briefly go through some points here. The first is that that in this proposed draft, we do in fact define riparian areas. And more importantly, we define where the benchmark of the riparian area is, which I haven't really seen in anyone's documents. Now, let me continue on, and I think I can explain the reason for that detail. First of all, this provides a simple and elegant solution. It utilizes the existing inland wetlands and watercourses framework. That is the processes that people are familiar with, the committees in the towns, the agencies, and how they currently practice meeting to meeting. The public is used to that. There's long-standing legal case law on different aspects of that. And really, to change that, I don't think would be something that I would support. We renamed the act and the agencies to specifically include riparian protection. In fact, the act would be called the Wetlands, Watercourses, and Riparian Protection Act. We provide the statewide benchmark, which I mentioned, and I'll go through that. If Casey, if you could bring that up, that would be a 22A38. I think you went by it. There we go. Thank you. So we have a new definition for riparian area, which means the land immediately bordering a river or stream delineated or computed by the mean river level height at the bank of the river or stream. The reason that I have river or stream is because that was what we had agreed on consensus-wise at the first meeting. And because we need to define a term that surveyors can use, this is a term that is common for identifying where it starts. So I think that's important. Even if we don't do a dimension, we should have a reference that the inland wetlands agencies can consider, because they may have to set or may want to set a specific dimension. It may be 10 feet, it may be 50 feet, but they need to know where to start. So we establish a statewide benchmark of where that point is. Mean river level, MRL, means the average height of the surface of the river or stream at any point, all stages, tide over a 19-year period, usually determined from hourly height recordings. Unusual variations in river due to flooding, discharge, runoff may be excluded from the computations. The next point I'll bring up is that we allow individual municipalities to determine the riparian protection distances in similar fashion to the way they do for upland review. Some towns have 50 foot, some towns have 100 feet, some have more, some have less. Dimensions for the upland review area. We allow them to do that, and this would commonly continue that practice. It recognizes the decades of existing case law and minimizes the concerns regarding takings and the associated litigation costs for the municipalities. As I mentioned earlier, litigation for takings cases is extremely expensive because they usually go as far as they can go, and somebody has to pay for that. But I don't think that this radically changes the structure, because it uses kind of the existing inland wetlands and watercourses structure, which there's plenty of case law for. It includes the provisions for revegetation of riparian areas and the removal of invasive species, and this is similar to what Alicia's proposal included. It more clearly and correctly identifies exemptions in 22A40. So, Casey, if you could go to 22A40. Thank you. Yeah, perfect. All right, so starting with the fact that it specifically states forestry, it doesn't refer to it as the agricultural. It makes specific mention that forestry is it permitted by right use. And if we go a little further down under 3, public and private beaches and marinas. So marinas are included by verbiage, and public and private beaches. I just want to tell you a quick story. My wife and I were driving around the state, I guess about 2 weeks ago. And I looked at a couple of different towns that had projects going on. And one of them had an enormous project redoing a waterfront so that it could be utilized for swimming and for recreational activities, fishing and so forth. And I thought to myself, if we were to put something in that would be mandatory, that they couldn't do this, how would Lake Besic exist, the beach area there? How would so many of these places exist if they could not maintain, they could not, take care of the area right by the water? And so that was added. I mentioned earlier the revegetation. This is the exact same language, I think, from Alicia's. And then a little farther down in 6, and I want to talk about this. This is something that's quite important, especially nowadays. We have issues with flooding. We have pipes that people are not permitted to clean because they have to prove that they're within a certain age. Well, it's not really practical. No one can actually go out and determine the age of a culvert pipe. Some of them are stamped, but those are typically painted markings and they're long gone or they're under the ground. And so because we have issues with flooding that we'd like to mitigate, this allows the cleaning of drainage pipes or culverts, and it takes out the requirement of the age. That addresses the flood mitigation concerns. We eliminate the outdated language in 42A, 22AG. Would you please move to that? That's It's, let me see what I have here. Oh, 22. I'm sorry. Thank you. 22A, 22. Yeah, G. If you go through, you'll see a bunch of strikeouts.
Page 30.
Thank you. You're getting there.
Are you still in 22A 40?
I think you need to move down. Let me see. Just a second.
I'm pretty sure it's page 30.
Thank you. Yes. 22A, 42A. I think sub V. Here you go. Yay, thank you. All right, so this language is pretty much outdated. As long as we're making changes, its removal probably makes sense. And lastly, these changes basically reinforcing the idea that riparian areas are important, which is why we're all around the table today, will not significantly add to DEP's workload or resource requirements.
Are you finished, Frank?
I
Any
am.
comments from the group?
I am.
Francis?
Thank you, Frank, for giving us another approach. It was nice to read. I do have one concern about adding public and private beaches and marinas to the uses that are permitted as of right, not just in riparian areas, but also wetlands and water courses. That's actually an expansion from current statute and could result in more impairment of or destruction of wetlands, water courses, and riparian areas. I do understand concerns from the business sector, but if you look at some of our water bodies, for instance, Lake Warrimal, we've seen a lot of development of giant mansions along the lake. And I'm sure some of those mansions would love to build their own private beach and completely replace whatever is there. And I don't know that directing the Inland Wetlands Commission to approve that as of right is the way we want to go.
Do you have an issue with existing beaches or just future beaches?
Well, I think what we're talking about here is only future, right? These are regulated activities, not what's already there. So I think, there are obviously reasons for beaches and marinas, but I don't see the harm in having that be a regulated activity that's not as of right.
I can buy that. That's fine. It's a good suggestion. Thank you, Francis.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting somewhere. William?
Yeah, I think we need some refinement on the mean river level. Is the intention that you would need a 19-year period of data to define that for any water course? Or is that specific to tidal areas?
So it's not specific to tidal areas. What we need, and again, we can be flexible here. It doesn't have to be that definition, but there needs to be some starting point so that, for instance, typically the way these things go is an applicant will come in, they'll have a surveyor, the surveyor will do an A2 survey of the property. The question will come up, well, okay, what about the distance? What is the actual riparian area? And we need some starting point. That's an example. That's a term that is typically used by surveyors. I agree the 19-year thing is a little bit, but that's how most of those terms are for whatever reason. They're 19 years.
Frank, I got to ask you, right now, the commissions use just linear feet when they're doing the 100-foot upland review, correct? So
They do, yes.
if we make them do this is a lot more complicated, isn't it?
Well, the thing of it is if you're going to get into an area where people can't access the water, particularly on a waterfront, whether it's a river, it's a pond, it's a lake, that parcel, this is going to be a contentious issue. Not everybody, and I can tell you that a lot of applicants that come before us, they want the access. That's what they paid for. And they're going to be challenging some of these things. So I think it's beneficial to say, here's where it starts. Now, the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission can adopt that. They could not by reference. But we should have something.
Okay, so you wouldn't do this statewide, you would make it optional for the Wetland Commission?
We could make it optional for the commissions, but particularly, I mean, not every commission is going to set up the same boundary. But my concern is that there should be some common denominator of where it starts. Your point about the upland review area is correct, but it's in every one of those cases, it's a little fuzzy because remember, in order to determine where the wetland is and where the upland review is, a soil scientist has to go out there, put holes in the ground. He may be a foot or two this way, he may be 4 feet that way, and he says, well, here's the line. So that's going to be by very nature kind of a variable dimension. So it's not like this is the exact point where the wetland starts. It doesn't work that way. They could be 10, 20 feet off and often are. But when you're talking about the edge of a river or a stream, we should define where that is.
Brian from Deep.
Thank you. And then Eliza has a comment as well. So yeah, agree, we need a starting point. I would just suggest that we have some further discussion at some point about what that definition is, because there are other definitions that could be brought into play here. There's a ordinary high water is a definition that's used for regulatory purposes. And so, yeah, and crossing over into the title discussion gets complicated too. I'm not sure we want to go there. So,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
But thank you, and I agree. I'm not saying that that has to be the absolute one. I'm just saying we need something, but I appreciate it. Your comments about using the watermark, also good.
Liza?
Yes, so overall, I'm very reluctant to add riparian areas into the title and in every place. And the reason is because of upland review areas in section 22A41D, which is what really codified upland review areas after they were established through case law. And so if you have your wetland or water course, then you have your riparian buffer, which is just a little bit outside. It's like your upland review area, it's a little bit outside. And now you have your riparian area. Is your upland review area even more outside of that? I think that it makes more sense to remember that the point of protecting the riparian area is to protect the water as opposed to protecting the area in and of itself. And I think that there's ways to do it without adding riparian areas as protected in the same way that wetlands and watercourses are protected.
Okay, Denise.
Yeah, so building on that, I think, like I said, there's two approaches here. One was regulating the activity, one is regulating the land. And I think the idea is, the confusion between riparian versus the inland, the upland review area. I agree. I think that that's going to create some type of contention. And I think the idea of, where we want to protect riparian areas that are in, upstream of water courses and not, part of the wetlands delineation, is that they're like a subset of the upland review area. We just really want to make sure that they're looking at that vegetation that's closest to the water courses. So I'm leaning towards looking at the talking about the regulated activity versus creating a new regulated area, which this does. And to build on what Brian said, so mean river level is determined by, it's a term that's kind of used and it fluctuates depending on what happens. And so over a 19-year period, so what was a regulated area now, if we get more drought or we get more rain, we don't know where that's going to be. If you're trying to look at it, and they do it by using USGS gauges. We do not have enough USGS gauges in this state to even come close to doing this. So usually if you're going to do this, you'll look at, mean high water or something like that, or at, but a lot of times we say bank full. That's usually a lot of times how you'll define a stream is bank full. So I think but I think it creates a problem, but just getting back to the idea of creating a regulated area versus a regulated activity, I think it's one of the things that we need to say, which way do we want to go? And I'm a little bit concerned about, again, the idea of the upland review area. It's one of the things we heard, we kind of put in, as you know, to the legislature originally, some language that talked about doing the regulated act area. We got a lot of pushback. That's where people are saying, now you've got another regulated area and that's a taking. And, they started calculating out if we went from the streams versus if we went to the wetlands and how much area this was going to be. And there was a real lot of pushback on that. So I think getting, really focusing more on the activity that we want to stop, which is mowing vegetation and cutting vegetation rather than looking at the exact area is probably a better way for us to go. Thank you.
We have Bill Lucy and then Rep. Dubitsky and then Mary Pelletier. Bill Lucy.
Yeah, just really briefly. So I guess the question is, following up on that, would this be better suited in the model regulations so a wetland commission could look at how deep, or the scientists are looking at what constitutes a riparian area to help them along instead of setting, I mean, I agree, you want the clarity in there. And I also appreciate, we were just talking, taking the opportunity since we're opening it up to clean up some of the remnants in this bill. That's always that's much appreciated. But so I guess this is a question for Deep. Would that be part of the process of education and model regulatory work that Deep could provide? Like, how do you define as a local commission where it starts and stops? The riparian area, that is.
So we could do that. I think that you also could do it in statute. I don't think there's any reason not to do it in statute. Other states have done it in statute, not in regulation. If this is something that you want, I think that you should write it the way you want it, as opposed to saying, let's see what happens in model regs.
If I might respond. First of all, thank you very much, Bill. I think the goal of this was to just make it clear that we value the riparian areas as much as we value the watercourses and as much as we value the wetlands. And so this was one way of making certain that message was communicated. I don't know that, I certainly understand the nuances of the use versus the regulation of the land, but I think that was the goal here.
Okay, Doug Dubitsky. Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you. And I thank Frank. Frank, this is obviously a lot of work, but I do have one disagreement with you. We don't value the riparian areas as much as the wetlands and watercourses. The purpose of the riparian area is to protect the water, to protect the wetland and the watercourse. So our goal is to make sure that the water is clean, not to make sure that everything outside of the water is clean. That's not really the function of an inland wetland and watercourse commission. So in the same way that we don't name it the Wetland and Watercourse and Upland Review Area Commission, we should not, in my opinion, add riparian areas to their name and to all of these statutes, because the goal is to protect the water in the wetlands, the water in the ponds, the water in the streams. That's the goal of this commission. And doing something with the Upland Review area, doing something with the riparian areas is the tool by which we are protecting the water. I know you have other stuff in here. I apologize, I have not had a chance to go through it all, but that was my one comment, and I do look forward to going through the rest of this.
I appreciate your comment, Representative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mary Pelletier.
I would very much agree that, we do need to protect riparian areas. And given I work on the Park River Regional Watershed, and so of course the Park River is notoriously buried. And when you bury a river, when you don't have any riparian area that's a landscape, you don't really have a healthy river at all, or stream or watercourse. So it is important that we try to work out a definition for riparian areas and include it in there. And I think that the whole idea of activity does make a lot of sense, but the issue of the distances provides a kind of balancing mechanism in terms of everything in moderation. We know that for our own personal health. And I think that's true with respect to the health of streams. So, writing in some strategy for balancing the health, what is the activity in relationship to the distances is maybe a way to do it. In the LEED rating system, they use a water budget per site, and it's a balancing mechanism for the development in relationship to the landscape on the site. And I'm not skilled at writing legislation, but I just am bringing up those issues because I don't think you can go all the way to one side, activities, or all the way to the other side, one size fits all distances, that we really are looking for a way to strike a balance in giving and help and guidance in helping future development positive become more positive. I don't think designers want or property owners want to hurt streams, but I think they need more guidance, and so distances and definitions help.
Sure. The distances are for jurisdiction, and then, but the balance is the mission. And I think, we can say that as we write this. We had Cynthia Rabinowitz online.
Yes, thank you. As a soil scientist for the last 45 years, I thought I would just chime in to clarify a couple of comments that were made earlier. So in the practice of delineating wetlands, the riparian area is not part of the wetland itself. It's the immediate land in the upland review immediately next to the wetland. So I wanted to just clarify that because it seemed like there was a little confusion there. Also, it is true that soil scientists may differ a little bit on the exact placement of a wetland line as delineated and flagged in the field. Soil science and the delineation of wetlands is based on science, proven science. And the various chemical and biological reactions that take place in soil leave markers on which we base our determination. So when you're actually doing the delineation, there is a little bit of judgment. I like to say it's an art based on science, but the discrepancy between two or more soil scientists marking the same line is fairly minimal. I have reviewed many soil scientists' lines. I've had mine reviewed. If there's discrepancy, it's a narrow area. We're talking, 2 to 3 feet, maybe, or less. Never wide discrepancies of the sort that were described earlier by a previous speaker. I apologize, I don't recall who that was. I just wanted to clarify that because I think it would be a mistake to say that the discrepancies in the delineation are very wide, because that would lend itself to people not trusting the work. Often wetlands commissions will ask for a review from, let's say, the conservation districts. That actually happens to be my role at Northwest Conservation District, is to help wetland commissions feel more confident about the lines that are coming into them from consulting soil scientists. Okay, that was all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So soils is key for the wetland delineation, but not necessarily for riparian, because that's more of an overlay on top of.
Well, it's not really an overlay. So the wetland line, if you were standing on the wetland line, downslope from that line would be the wetland. Upslope from that line is upland review. And the riparian area is part of the upland review, and the width of it would be determined by regulations. Does that clarify better?
Yeah, the wetlands are soil based.
Yes.
The riparian, not so.
Correct. It's part of the upland review.
Okay, I think we get that. And thank you very much for reminding us. And then Joan Nichols.
Hi, I just wanted to lend support to including the word forestry in 22A-40. I saw it in Frank's proposal. I believe Janet also included it. There's always been we have to keep explaining that forestry is part of agriculture. In anticipation of this morning's meeting, I looked at Connecticut General Statute 1-1Q, which is our state definition of agriculture, and in there is the word forestry. So I think this just further clarifies that forestry is part of agriculture and belongs in the permitted use of right language in the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act. So I appreciate that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alicia.
One of the goals here, I believe, was to protect vegetation in the riparian areas, because that's the value of slowing down stormwater through that natural vegetation and not having lawns all the way down to rivers and streams. Where in your proposal does it specifically protect the existing vegetation?
I don't believe it mentions the existing vegetation at all.
Okay.
A merger may be in our future. Okay, are we done with Frank's proposal? Everybody's talked that one to death?
Actually, sorry.
Mary Pelletier?
Thanks. So I'm not sure if it was Frank, but the discussion about property and edges of rivers and streams move. And being in Hartford, where you have property lines that are 100 years old, we see I have these problems along the North Branch where the stream has moved so much that the vegetation that's in land, the riparian area of one property owner is now on the other side of the stream. And it's often in those locations where we see the most problematic, the lack of proper management of the vegetation and the stream riparian area. And so in terms of the definitions, I forgot why I flagged that, but it's not so easy to, claim that rivers and streams don't move, because they do. So we really are trying to protect the land and the landscape and who's ever responsible for managing it, including, properties adjacent to it, because someday the property owner could find their property on the other side of the stream, perhaps, and then they need to know that their neighbor has the same responsibilities in managing that, if that makes any sense.
It sure does.
That's actually an odd taking, because around, for instance, Batterson Pond, property owners, the city owns the whole rim around Batterson Pond, but residential property owners have started to stretch there's sort of a taking of the land by mowing and building docks down to the pond, and so they're claiming that they own the pond when in fact they don't, and they're not. And here again, a lot of it is the sort of manicuring and building is the sort of form of the taking.
We'll sick Representative D'Amico on this issue because this is his favorite project. But you're right. There's the Connecticut River, for example, has moved. And in fact, there's a piece of Weathersfield on the other side of the river now, on the Glastonbury side. It's still owned by Weathersfield, but it's on the other side of the river. So it does happen. We have to respect that the rivers will sometimes change their course. And my river, the Quinnipiac, moves all the time. It's low gradient river, and if there's a big flood, it'll cut off a bend and have a new course. So we have to keep that in mind too. But thank you, Frank, for your proposal to bring it to us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your questions.
I wanted to, I know everyone is working overtime here, and I wanted to just do a couple of them that I think are really important to discuss as a group before we adjourn. One of them is Francis Pickering's incentive program for farmers to add riparian buffer. If you would be willing to talk about that.
I go to the front or stay here?
Sure. Sure, thank you. We talked at the very beginning of this process about trying to bring farmers along without necessarily removing the exemption. And Francis came up with an idea to do that, so.
Let me just share my screen briefly so we can see what we're talking about. So we've spent some time talking about the potential impacts of any changes to the Wetlands Act on farms. I think we all understand that we're not talking about existing land use. We're only talking about moving forward. But many of the areas that are of concern to us already have riparian buffers that have been impacted or impaired by the removal of natural vegetation. And of course, there are many others that could be impacted in the future. And so just as a recap, Connecticut, like all other states in the country, does have a version of current use assessment, which we apply to land uses that we've decided there's a public interest in maintaining. Those include large tracts of forest land, maritime heritage land. There are some local options, and of course, farmland, because we want to ensure that our farmers are not priced out of their livelihood by property taxes. And so a farmer can, under state law, go to the local assessor and have their land, subject to the assessor's approval, reassessed as farmland. And what you see on the screen is the recommended values that OPM puts out in concert with DEEP and the Department of Agriculture. And in many cases, these values are substantially lower than what the fair market value of that land under a highest and best development scenario would be. Now, what's interesting about this, and we just touched on this before, is that the riparian areas are not based on soil. They are based on their proximity to the water course, right? That they feed into it. When you look at Public Act 490, however, the assessments, the valuations on a per acre basis are based on soil type. They're not actually based upon the ecological value of this to a hydrological system. And so this actually creates a perverse incentive. Let's say you're a farmer, and it can create a perverse incentive. You have land, and you've gone to your assessor, and your assessor says, okay, well, we're going to adjust your assessment to be tillable A or tillable B. And you look at your land and say, well, I have to pay taxes, and I want to maximize my income given the expenses I have. So I'm going to farm on the land that has the highest value because it will bring in more money. I'll have more crops. We don't differentiate based upon how close this is to a water course. We only differentiate on what the potential production from that land is, which could lead farmers to put land into production that ecologically may not be ideal to put in production, and to fallow land that may not be of high ecological value. And in essence, this is agnostic as to the ecological value of the property. So the proposal, I'm not going to walk you through all the language because it's really just a concept. The language can change. The concept here is we know that very few farmers farm property line to property line. Some of their land is farmed, some is periodically fallowed, and some is left in its natural state. And when a farmer goes to an assessor and says, this is a farm, odds are that that will be, some of the land may still be taxed at a higher value, for instance, where their homestead is, that's not actually in agricultural production. Often that corresponds to the minimum lot size for residential development in the municipality, but the rest of the land may be taxed as though it were farmland. We could enhance Public Act 490 to direct assessors to reduce the assessment on land that farmers voluntarily keep out of production, regardless of the soil classification. So if a farmer said, I've got 100 acres and 60 acres of them are prime farmland soil, but 10 of those acres front a river, they fall in the riparian area. Right now, we don't give any incentive for the farmer not to farm that land, which of course is to his economic interest, but it also creates environmental and economic costs for everybody else who's downstream of that. Under this proposal, the assessor would then, in the way that Public Act 490 works, Public Act 490 is essentially an agreement that I will maintain this land in production for 10 years, I will maintain these areas, these riparian areas, in their natural state for 10 years. And instead of being assessed at, say, $32.50 statewide or $39.50 in the River Valley per acre, it might be a lower assessment, such as $200 per acre. So this does not compel a farmer to do anything. It just provides an option and an incentive for a farmer to maintain land in its natural state where there is a significant environmental benefit and public interest to us.
A very interesting idea. I'd like to hear Mr. Jeremiah's thoughts on this. Oh, Rep. Dubisky.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this proposal. This is actually an area of the law that I represent many farmers on this very specific issue, and have for decades. The way that PA 490 is supposed to be assessed, PA 490 land, is based on use, not based on soil, based on use. So if a farmer has a field that he uses as a permanent pasture, even if that field could be used for something else, he's assessed at what he's using it for. So if he then takes his cows off and plants apple trees, it goes from permanent pasture to orchard. Even if it's possible for him to plant tobacco, which would be tillable A, it's assessed at the use. So it is entirely possible for a farmer to tell the assessor, I'm not doing anything. I'm just allowing to grow naturally an area, X number of feet from every wetland and watercourse on my property, and therefore I should be taxed less. However, they can do that right now. I don't think they need to have any statutory change to allow that. It's entirely possible that we could clarify some of the statutes to make it clear to the assessors who, frankly, most of them are completely befuddled by PA 490 and don't understand how it works or how to assess farmland. Perhaps we could clarify some of the language to make it clearer that if a farmer chooses to use an area around wetlands and watercourses in that way, it must be assessed at the lowest value. I think that, perhaps that would be a good way to go, but I know there are currently farmers that do that right now, and they are assessed under the swamp, ledge, scrub category. So anything we can do to make it clearer to assessors what they're supposed to do with farmland would be helpful. And if you think that clarifying this would be an incentive to farmers to dedicate some of their land for that purpose, I'm all for it.
Thank you, Representative Dubisky. And I have heard from many people who share your sentiments about the application of Public Act 490 by assessors. I think clarification would absolutely be helpful. Potentially also education of farmers. I'm not sure what % of farmers who actually do not put land in production actually have their land assessed at its use value. So that would be a question. The last point I would make is that while Public Act 490 does require a 10-year commitment, my understanding is it's not a commitment to a specific farming use, but to maintaining it as a farm, right? So land that is in a riparian buffer, although it would technically be eligible for a lower assessed value per acre, could at any point within that 10 years be converted, right? There's no requirement that the natural vegetation be maintained. The farmer could say, well, I'm going to remove the trees and convert this into a pasture and still qualify for Public Act 490.
That is correct. When a farm is assessed as a farm, it includes areas of forestry within the farm unit, scrubland, wetlands, even areas that can't be tilled or actively farmed because, for example, many wooded areas are used as part of the farm because they provide wind buffer. They provide separation between the farming operation and the neighbors. They provide water infiltration to keep the water clean. There are a number of reasons why farmers don't farm edge to edge and leave a portion of their property at any given time unfarmed. That doesn't mean it's not farmland. Many farms have, if you've got 100 acres of farm, you might have, 30 or 40 acres of woodland that's still part of the farm unit. And it is, there's a category for woodland and forest land as part of the farm unit. Now, there's two different ways to do it. You could either do it as forestry, or you could do it as part of the farm unit. But either way, they're essentially taxed the same.
That's true, although if it is classified as forestry, then there's a requirement for a forest management plan and that it be essentially kept in forested condition for the 10-year period, which with a farm, as I mentioned before, with farming, you have the ability to convert under the umbrella of farming between different land covers, which I think is the challenge we're talking about here, that yes, there's an incentive for farmers if the farmer is aware of it and the assessor is cooperative to receive a financial benefit for not farming part of their property, but there's no 10-year commitment to maintaining that. So perhaps there could be an opportunity or a discussion about maybe sweetening the deal to provide an additional incentive to maintain it for 10 years to protect riparian areas. I know some municipalities, like a couple of them, have actually looked at the local option under Public Act 490 for open space, and they've actually applied that in riparian areas to provide a benefit to all landowners to maintain riparian buffers. So there is some precedent for doing this within 490.
Well, thank you for your efforts. It's good thinking out of the box.
It is good thinking out of the box. We appreciate it very much that you came in with a proposal. We have a couple other comments on this. Bill Lucy, and then Joan Nichols, and then we'll go back to Mr. Jeremiah.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a fantastic proposal. We need to have some incentives in here. I guess I have a technical question either for the co-chairs or for Deep, but it may have been answered. If this is already doable under 490, do we need to pass changes to 490 at the same time we're passing changes to the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act to make a proposal like this work? Any takers?
I'm just guessing yes, but we would check with the attorney for the committee.
Okay.
Joan Nichols.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Frank. It's a thoughtful proposal. A couple of comments I had is when a farmland owner or a farmer is going in with their application for 490, on a map, they would designate the areas for the different categories and then configure the acreage appropriately. So if on the map they voluntarily, say I've got X number of acres of tillable land, X number of acres of woodland, then I've got this swamp, scrub, and ledge area that Representative Dubitsky referred to. And they, draw that up on a map and it includes the riparian area that they voluntarily choose not to farm or leave in a natural vegetated state. They can do that now without any changes in the law. And I think it would be unusual if a farmer said, I'm leaving, I'm not farming this area right down to the edge of the brook. I'm leaving a 15, 20, 25 foot, whatever they choose to do, undisturbed riparian area, and therefore would go into swamp, scrub, and ledge. I can't imagine an assessor would dispute that and say, well, we're still going to tax you at a higher rate. So I think the mechanism in 490 is already there, to Representative Dubitski's point, to assess the land for what it's currently being used for. And the other reason I brought up the Wetland Buffer Act that was passed in 2005 is to see if there was some, thinking again outside the box, if there was some other tax incentive to not just farmland for property owners that are not just farmland owners or farmers to protect riparian areas, but also landowners that are not farmers. I'm just thinking, could we use the wetland riparian wetlands assessment law to look at those other land uses that are not farmland and give those landowners a reduced tax assessment? Thank you.
Thanks, Joan.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think you're absolutely right on the second point. We do have other land uses, some land uses such as golf courses that are often are heavily treated and they drain directly into our water, and providing an incentive for them to rethink their landscaping could be beneficial. And getting back to your first point, just because something is technically possible doesn't mean that it will always be used. So this could be an opportunity for education, whether it's the Department of Agriculture, OPM, Connecticut Farmland Trust, et cetera, about not only the existence of Public Act 490 and the different classifications, but the benefits of having a naturally vegetated riparian buffer, which, frankly, many landowners, whether they're farmers or not, might not be aware of.
Thank you, Francis. Jeremiah.
Francis, thank you. You got a lot in these 3 pages here, and I had all notes all over it. But the reality is, if we look at Public Act 490, that's an enormous elephant. Trying to change something there would sort of, I'm not gonna say waste everyone's time in the room, but it's big. The farmers, now again, we represent almost 2 million acres. And I'm trying to find if this is correct. So I'm looking, we're tilling about 6%. We must have the largest riparian area in the state of Connecticut. Responsible, we're taking care of it. So anything, I've always makes my skin crawl just a little bit when I feel like this finger pointing. I'm not saying that happened here at all, but it is what it is. I like the education piece. That's huge. I don't think, and not that I don't agree with, but I don't think that trying to compensate a farmer for giving up good tillable land is going to work. Because if it's something that's producing, you've got, let's say it's 50 foot either side of the stream that bifurcates his property, and he's going to lose 5 acres, and you're going to give him $1,000. Well, that's such fertile land that he's, and nobody's saying he's tilling right up to the stream as it is now, but such fertile land, the invasives are going to come in. Who's going to maintain it? Are you going to provide enough money for that? Like this, but the education piece is huge. The book that Joan passed around here last time we were in here for the lake owners, and there's a lot of stuff in there I didn't even realize, things that I didn't think to do. And I really, really like clean water. Wish I had more on the farms. So I think education and providing, you've got a lot of successful farmers out there that, even though if we can all agree that the farmers are absolutely not the problem, and if the state was still wall-to-wall farms, we wouldn't be in this room. We'd be home with our families. But nevertheless, if you say, hey, there's a better thing, or let's share like the one slide where the cow can get access to the water, but we left a riparian there, a lot of people would be in favor of that. I don't think this taxpayer has to necessarily pay for that. I think let's have monthly meetings. Let's not just say farmers, let's say homeowners, lake owners, all that. A lot of people would do that's how we need to clean it up. This regulation thing, I'm going to call it what it is, it's overregulation. There's not enough money to enforce it. There's not enough knowledge for people who are enforcing it to take care of it. And it's like, so even though I might buck some of these ideas, and there's a lot of there's a lot of footage, we have the same exact goal. And it boils down to the lack of education. If we started there, we might end there. There's enough responsible farmers, landowners, people in the state of Connecticut that could possibly clean this up on their own before we try to touch Public Act 490 or force small ponds to not be used.
If I could just, you're making some really good points, and Connecticut actually has a great Public Act 490 guide out there. It's looking at it right now, about 60 pages, and it doesn't mention riparian in there at all, right? So you could even just add a page about just put it in there, because people who are using this program probably refer to the guide at some point just to draw attention to it. You're not forcing anybody. You're just adding information about, here are some benefits to doing, if you're going to not produce on all your land, here's how you might want to configure it. I'm not going to say farmers don't know how to farm, because they obviously do. And at the Council of Governments, we work more frequently on urban suburban development, right? And we have home builders who know how to build homes, but sometimes a commission can simply ask a question or raise an issue, and suddenly the site plan changes, right? Because no developer is omniscient, right? Why does your plat show that house facing that direction, right? If you just rotate the house, you can reduce winter heating costs by 20% with passive solar design, right? Why are you putting the deck not where the $1 million views are, right? We're not telling the developer how to do their own, be a developer, but sometimes just somebody asking a question can result in a better outcome. So I think perhaps that's the way we go on this. We just make the information available, and in a place people will come across it, and then they do what they want with it.
A little more than that is, I'm 54, so I've never read the Public Act 490, and I probably won't. So if we put another page in there, it may not help me do my part. But so really, like, it is a big piece. But actually, before we throw more money at deep that they probably don't even want for this, like getting meetings, I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but getting meetings together that we would go to, the greenhouse growers and nurserymen would host, and just teach people. You can't force somebody who doesn't want to be a good steward to be a good steward, but you've got most people that do. And it's like, so to your point, yes, put that page in there, but yet we need to be told. We're not going to voluntarily, read something because we've got so much else ahead of it. But I think that's like starting with Joan's book, but even once a month, once a year, whatever, for lake owners. Thank you.
We have Mary Pelletier online. You really going to speak on farming, Mary? You're an urban watershed.
It's true, although I'm actually from Kansas, and my family has considerable history in.
Okay, you could speak then.
Okay. And I'd like to say that agricultural uses adjacent to riparian areas, the use, I don't think it's so much about the agriculture, it's the herbicides and the chemicals. And I happen to know a lot about this because my father invented high flotation fertilizer applicators and manufactured them. And those they're used across the world now, and it's not a healthy thing. Most of the water courses throughout the Great Plains are polluted right now, and the wells are polluted, and so the big problem is how agriculture is done, and education cannot replace the guardrails of policy and better design. And again, I know this because of what's happened to the Great Plains, to the state of Kansas, where science and knowledge of farmers has been completely upended because teaching people is expensive. And if the chemical industry is able to teach people that chemicals are good for plants, they will. And because they're selling a product, they're selling GMO plants. And so I, as much as I respect farmers and their ability to see the land, I also have seen the damage that the chemical industry has done across the Great Plains.
I want to apologize for assuming you don't have an interest in farming being in an urban watershed. I realize that you're loaded with information. So sorry about that. That was well stated. Joe.
The Connecticut farms do not use nearly as much fertilizer or whatever might be polluting the plains. It's actually totally different. When we looked here at Massachusetts and Vermont and stuff like that, that's more similar. But I just don't want anyone to imply like we're polluting. We all agree that as we were born we started polluting, but I didn't quite like where that went, just to be honest with you. It's not true. It's not true.
I have very good friends who have land along the Connecticut River that they leased to a farmer who planted corn for many years, and there wasn't a single insect. It was in the floodplain of the Connecticut River. And a lot of decisions are made because everybody's profit margins are extremely tight in agriculture. And so I have observed what happens in Connecticut along the Connecticut River. I have understand the challenges with the finances of farmers, and I respect the difficulties they go through. But I also know that many farmers are in this area are still planting crops that don't support pollinators and they must have something. They must be using some kind of chemicals because you'd be walking down a hill and see fireflies and beautiful, and then it's all gone. When you get to the cornfield, there's no insects at all.
Okay, I'm hoping to just do one more item before we'll have a couple more speakers on a farm incentive piece that Francis developed. But I also want to cover one more topic today before we adjourn, which so start thinking about whether we should continue an as of right exemption for marine trades, or should we narrow it up as some states have done. So think about that. And that one we really should talk about before we adjourn. Now we have speakers still on this topic. We have, was Alicia?
Yeah, Alicia Sharmat, Rivers Alliance. Outside of, this does go outside of agriculture. I just wanted to caution everyone on jumping on the education bandwagon more broadly. Rivers Alliance has had a publication called The Importance of Riparian Buffers that was published in 2004. It is still absolutely relevant. Our organization, for probably its entire existence, which is 30 plus years, has been doing education on the value of riparian buffers and protecting that vegetation. And I can tell you, we're not going to do it on education alone. And as Mary said, having the policy behind it is, sure, there are plenty of people that are going to do this voluntarily, but they're probably evenly matched or outnumbered by those who don't care.
Rep. Dubisky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just need to put in a word for the farmers here. In places in Connecticut where there are a lot of farms, we have the cleanest most pristine waters in the state. In places where there are very few farmers, like in Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, the water quality is much less pristine. So without getting into it too much, I just wish the people from the cities would leave the farmers alone. They're really doing a hell of a job keeping our environment clean, keeping our environment unbuilt, making sure that we all have food to eat, animals to look at, wildlife, trees, grass. I don't see much of that in downtown Hartford. So I would just hope that those in the cities would stop trying to force the people in the country to build all types of housing, to build all types of things, to do stuff that they do in the cities because they think that's the right thing. Well, the farmers know what the right things are to preserve the land. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. And if you look around the state, you can see that they've done a pretty darn good job. So with regard to keeping the water clean, it's not the farmers that are the problem. It's the people in the cities. It's the industry. It's not guys with cows. It's not guys that are planting corn, planting soybeans, having orchards. That's not what's polluting our waters. Just look at the waters of this state. Look where they're dirty. Look where they're clean. So when we try to come up with a solution to keep the waters clean, I'm telling you, it's not the farmers that are the problem.
I just want to interrupt here and say, no one, I don't think, is talking about removing their exemption. The proposal is simply an incentive to reward them if they leave riparian buffer vegetated. That's it. So they can still do whatever they want. It's an extra incentive. Am I correct, Rep. Pickering? Or
Respect for farmers too. I just want to say, I'm sorry that you misinterpreted what I had to say. Again, all my parents, my father's families from farming backgrounds. Okay. So, just to be clear, I really respect the farmers, but I also know that that industry and budgets and money, the cost of farming, can and regulations. It's not as perfect in Connecticut. Is It's not easy for anyone. No one knows the right answer. We need guardrails of policy. We need guidance. We need science. We need education. We need a balance of all those factors.
Liz Verna, then Bill Hyatt.
So this is not regarding farming, although I support Mr. Jeremiah's comments. I would like to go back and ask Attorney Brooks regarding the burden of proof on the applicant. Can she go into more detail about that? Because when we developers submit an application, we provide the commission with experts and obviously anything they request or ask for. So switching the burden, I always thought the burden of proof was on the applicant. Maybe that's for zoning. Is there a difference between wetlands and zoning? And why are we switching it back to the applicant? I just want more clarification on that, if she could provide that.
I wonder if the two of you could correspond by email,
Okay,
because what I'd like to do is wrap up the other unanswered question about marine trades.
I will get her contact information and give her a call.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just for, we have so much to do and trying to keep us on schedule if possible. Thank you, Janet, for corresponding with Liz. Thank you, Liz. And we still have Bill Hyatt on this issue, on the farming issue.
Yeah, not necessary. We need to move on. I agree.
Okay. Can we address briefly whether we would recommend marine trades keep their exemption as written, open-ended, or do we narrow it up as some states have done? Frank?
It's my opinion that we should allow them to keep what they have now. I think they've done a pretty respectable job. Granted, they do need to have pretty open access to waterways and so forth. It's just the nature of what they do. I don't think they've done anything that they should be penalized for, or additional regulation should be put in for in their case.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, you're starting to get into other aspects of protecting the water. When I think of marine trades, I think about where I'm taking my boat and then sheet piling, not necessarily a location where you'd have a riparian forest along these marinas. But so I guess that's the question. They all are subject to the industrial stormwater plans. We just did a big rewrite of the erosion control and stormwater guide for the state of Connecticut, which was a joyful 1.5 year experience, which I was part of. Whether that's fortunate or not, I do think though that those new guidelines were a large improvement on what was there before. One of the components was moving from a 1-inch water quality event to a 1.3 inch, which was supported by the science for removing more nitrogen. So I guess I'd need a little more clarity on what are we considering the marine trades, and what are they doing under their SWIP plan to already clean up stormwater from those sites. Thank you.
Yeah, Alicia, I had you down on the previous meeting as speaking about this.
Well, I guess I need to understand, are we talking about section 22A-43, boat anchorage or mooring? Are we talking about that status quo?
I'm not sure where it is in the statute, but the question came up at an earlier meeting because I've been writing the report, and marine trades wished to keep their current exemption.
Well, I think, well, I'm not sure that exemption applies. I would actually be interested if anyone could tell me how that exemption applies to on land work. Because as I read it, an anchorage or mooring is actually in the water course. And so I'm not entirely sure that they already have a current exemption to their on land work. Because I think Bob Petzel did mention that he has had to go through inland wetlands for the work at his marina. So I think maybe just understanding, I think what does exist is Maine has a definition of working waterfronts that exempt them from the shoreline vegetation removal. But I think we could probably find some way to do it without broader exemptions that don't already exist. I'm sure we can find a way. I don't have a recommendation at this point, but it's something we can certainly work toward.
Okay, well, between now and January 7th, if you find something that you think you want to propose to the group, bring it in. Send it to us. Hopefully not on the midnight of January 6th. Because that's what happened this time, and that was not good.
Well, we have more time between the meeting this time.
Yeah, we
That'll
have
be-
more time. So, yeah, that would be good. And we got Bill, right? Yeah, we got Bill. So we did go overtime today by an hour, but I think it was worthwhile. And we're going to try to start writing in broad strokes the reforms that we think the group will gather around. We're probably gonna have a couple fights and we will have votes on those. And we could do a majority report says this and the minority report recommends that for specific sections. But I think that a lot of this can be consensus. I think. We'll see. So please look at the language over the break, and we'd like to meet on the 7th to actually vote on the report and the recommendations. January 7th. William.
Is that date flexible, the 7th, or has that been set?
Well, it was suggested by our clerk, but do you have a different, are you going to be away?
I did prefer the Friday meetings. They did work a lot better, but
You like Friday better?
yes.
What does the group think?
Well, the problem is that puts us so close to the deadline. January
What is
15th.
the deadline?
January 15th.
Yeah, January 15th, we have to hand in. Well, you could Zoom in, William, if that would be better.
That we'll have to do, yeah.
Okay. Probably 10. Big snowstorm, we'd have to move it, but no, that's when we have to hand in our report.
January 7th.
And my colleague, Rep. Anderson, wishes to have some closing remarks.
Thank you. So I know we got not really long today and we're late on the calendar. And my remarks might be for the minority report, so I don't want anyone feel ambushed. We talked about doing things incrementally. So I'm going to suggest how that could go, because the four legislators here are all on the Environment Committee, and we'll probably see you all back for a public hearing day. So, and I've done a lot of listening, this is new to me. I think for the sake of being incremental, we leave off lakes and ponds. Lake Ormog was mentioned, and I looked it up on my phone, and that's very regulated now, the shoreline, by private association, by zoning, by inland wetland, by deep. We heard about Batterson Pond, and when we were voting on that, I took a walk around it, and that has issues, but you got 3 towns or 2 towns and a city, or 2 cities and a town. And, that needs to have a plan going forward. So I'm going to suggest something to narrow it down, that we focus on the 5 federally designated wild and scenic rivers, and then allow the towns to designate what water courses they want to use, using the cold water habitat stream guide as a guide. So I'm going to throw that out as an incremental. It may be too late for this, but at least no one will feel surprised January 7th or when I have an amendment in the Environment Committee. But that's the way, hopefully, maybe you agree with me, that's a way to do it incrementally and really test it. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I can assure you I won't agree to that, because my area is not wild and scenic. I'm in an urbanized area, so my rivers have some catching up to do. Alicia.
Representative Anderson, just so you understand, the wild and scenic rivers essentially already have this through zoning. So what I had put as an important factor is making sure we don't undermine what protections are already there. That would actually undermine what protections are already there if we're focusing just on that.
And I would only look at increasing protections if needed. But just to respond to that, maybe I'm saying I think we leave out the ponds and include designated rivers. I'll look closely at what those protections are, wild and scenic. Thank you.
see a minority report in our future. Does anyone else wish to speak on? William?
Yeah, I'd just like to speak on that topic from the perspective of drinking water utilities. I mean, obviously, we want to see additional protections for those watersheds, and many of those ponds and lakes are not protected by additional regulations. So, and many of them are not owned by drinking water sources, as was indicated. Many of them are privately owned. So that's something that we definitely want to see expanded.
Okay, so we will definitely be voting in January 7th. Because we already have some agreements we cannot consensus on, so. But thank you for everyone for your time. You spent a lot of effort today looking at language, and it took us a long time. We had no breaks. We appreciate your dedication to trying to solve this problem. Can we have a motion to adjourn? Second for Francis, all in favor? Aye. We'll see you on January 7th.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, everybody have a good holiday. Drive safe.
Happy holidays.